At least 30 people are dead in the Bahamas in the wake of Hurricane Dorian. The Category 5 storm tore through the Bahamas last Sunday, packing maximum sustained winds of 185 miles per hour. That meant roofs were torn apart, they were torn off, leaving debris all along its path. And for more than 2 days, Josh Morgerman, a popular storm chaser, was actually reported missing. After heading to the Abacos Islands in preparation for the storm, he later signaled that everything was okay. Morgerman is the subject of the Science Channel's new show, Hurricane Man, which spotlights how people from all different walks of life feel the effects of our planet's most ferocious hurricanes. Well, Josh Morgerman joins us now to share his experience during Hurricane Dorian. Josh, thank you very much for joining us. First off, I'm glad to hear that you were okay. But you and I were talking before the start of this interview. You said this is one of the worst hurricanes that you've ever been in. Why was it so bad?
You know, maximum sustained winds of 185 miles an hour with gusts well over 200. That's a rare bird. I mean, this was not just a Category 5. This was way into Category 5. You don't get hurricanes like that often. And for one of them to make a direct hit on a populated area, that is extremely unusual.
So walk me through what it was like to really be there in the middle of all of this.
Well, the hurricane approached and we had several hours of wind and rain, and then as the inner core, the inner ring of violent winds hit the town, Marsh Harbor, just everything went crazy. Basically, everything just turned white. You couldn't see anything. I was in a concrete building. The walls were shaking. Nonstop crashing sounds as flying debris was hitting the building. The boards blew off the windows, and 5 other guys now were holding furniture against the shutters to keep them from blowing in, because if they did, that room where 10 people were sheltering would have become a shooting gallery of flying debris. I mean, it was a close call. By the time we got to the comm center, the eye, I mean, we barely made it. And we came outside during the eye. Cars thrown all over the place, some of them mangled like they'd been through a blender, okay, just from the wind. Storm was only halfway over. We had to find another building to ride out the second half.
It's so scary to hear you say this. You know, people are meant to evacuate in a situation like this. You go right into it. What kind of precautions do you take when you go in?
Well, with a hurricane like this, when you're dealing with this level of hurricane, it's like, this is like you go from conventional warfare to nukes. This is like a special thing. You handle it with care. So a hurricane like this, I play it safer, meaning I don't just, ride it out anywhere. I ride it out in a concrete building. And actually, I thought I was being very conservative in playing it safe by riding this out in a big concrete school with many other people. Even that building wasn't safe because of those 185-mile-an-hour winds. That's how strong this hurricane was, that it really just, the conventionally safe places weren't safe.
We're getting word from our troops on the ground that, people just don't even realize the extent of the devastation from this right now. What did you see when you walked out?
I'm glad that we're talking about this because the world needs to know. The devastation, you can't get words to describe it. The whole area, the areas above the water level were just flattened by just these incredible winds, but large parts of Marsh Harbor, this town, are very low lying, and a tremendous storm surge, meaning the ocean coming up onto land, which happens during hurricanes, that just swept a whole area of the city clean, and they still haven't found all the bodies. I mean, this was like really serious stuff, and it's not just the severity of the damage, but the extent of it is every direction. It's like tornado damage, but it's for miles and miles and miles in every direction. Help is needed.
So do you think that the Bahamas, were they prepared for this type of hurricane?
Well, I think to some degree, yes, because the Bahamas, one of the things that they really excel at is construction. So Bahamian houses and buildings, they know how to build for hurricanes. And I've seen this in the past. When strong hurricanes hit the Bahamas, very little damage to houses and buildings. Now, this one was so strong that actually there was a lot of damage, but it was just because of how unusual it was. So in that sense, I think they were pretty good. In other areas, maybe not so good. That low-lying part of the city that I was talking about that got swept by that storm surge, they did advise people in that area to evacuate, but because of either communication issues or people not understanding the threat, a lot of people stayed, and those are the ones who died.
You went silent for a while on Twitter, and people were genuinely concerned that something had happened to you. Shortly after, you returned to Twitter and you sent out this tweet: "Medical clinic overwhelmed, an absolute catastrophe. Send help to Abaco Islands." How bad of a humanitarian crisis do you think this is now at this point?
It's mammoth. There were so many people. Basically, the government, it's called the Bahamas Government Complex. It's the biggest, strongest building in the town. That became sort of like this hub of human activity. Everyone who lost their home was basically living in and around this property. Didn't seem like a lot of people. There were a lot of people in charge, so folks were kind of left on their own. There weren't food supplies at that point, and the plumbing wasn't working well. It was a real, I would call it a humanitarian crisis. I mean, people were having very good spirits about it, but it was a tough situation. Now, the medical clinic next door, like I said, was overwhelmed, and those doctors and nurses, man, heroic, working around the clock to help people. But, you know, they had more than they can handle with their resources and with their staff.
You've chased storms, like I said, for 28 years. What do you think the takeaway is from this particular hurricane that hit the Bahamas?
That's a great question. I think that education about storm surge, which is the ocean coming up onto land, needs to continue. Now, I was in the other storm that ties this one for me was Super Typhoon Haiyan. A typhoon and a hurricane are the same thing. It's just what they call it in East Asia. Super Typhoon Haiyan, which flattened a city in the Philippines. Thousands died in that one, again, because of storm surge. And what we found afterward was that the people in the threatened area didn't understand what storm surge is and that they need to get onto higher ground. And I think that's what happened here in the Bahamas. Wow. It's all about education. If people could be educated, if they could understand this threat, we won't have these kinds of casualties.
Josh Morgerman, so grateful you could join us, Josh.
My pleasure.
And be sure to tune in to The Hurricane Man. It premieres on the Science Channel September 15th, 9 p.m. Eastern.